Princes are not bound to give an account of their actions, but to God alone. Charles I, 1628. I go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown, where no disturbance can be, no disturbance in the world. Last words of Charles I, 1649. Charles I was born in Scotland in 1600, the second son of King James VI. 2.5 years later, his father would also be crowned King of England as James I. He was the king's second son, and as such was not initially expected to succeed his father to the throne. However, in 1612, his elder brother Henry died unexpectedly from typhoid fever, and the child Charles assumed his role as the Prince of Wales and heir apparent. Initially, he was engaged to Maria Anna of Spain, but the engagement was called off the next year. Then, in 1625, James I died, and Charles shortly thereafter married the French princess Henrietta Maria, a committed Roman Catholic. Though his father had expressed some desire to reconcile the Anglican Church with the Puritans, Charles took a harder line. A traditionalist who favored high church liturgy and the finer things in life, Charles valued the pomp of the Church of England, trappings of its Roman Catholic roots, over the austerity demanded by the Puritans. Despite Charles's French connection through his wife, he launched a naval campaign against the French during the late 1620s. The English built a fleet which set sail for the French port of La Rochelle, where French Huguenots, which is a Calvinist Protestant group, were under siege by forces of the French king. The costly military venture was ultimately a failure, and the result for Charles was a building resentment in England over so much money spent for so little gain. Compounding the issues at hand was the fact that Charles had a high view of the royal prerogative, meaning he didn't want to be limited by Parliament. In 1629, he dissolved Parliament and began ruling as an absolute monarch. This became known as the 11 Years' Tyranny, in which Charles ruled England absolutely without a sitting Parliament. In 1639, things continued to deteriorate when Charles attempted to oppose a different church structure on the Church of Scotland, moving it from a Presbyterian to an Episcopal structure under bishops. The result was war with Scotland, and in 1640, Charles was forced to recall his parliament in what became known as the Short Parliament in order to secure money to continue his wars. The Short Parliament only lasted a few weeks before it was again dissolved because it wouldn't grant Charles the funds he demanded. Though the Second Bishops' War ended in 1640, the political situation in England was still turbulent. That autumn, Charles called Parliament together again in what became known as the Long Parliament. Despite initial attempts to reconcile with the king and reform England on more egalitarian grounds, in 1642, Charles attempted to arrest 5 members of the House of Commons on the grounds that they were starting rebellion against him. The 5 men escaped, and civil war loomed. The next month, Parliament passed the Militia Ordinance, which allowed local municipalities to raise militia forces loyal to Parliament. That summer, Charles declared war against Parliament and began his preparations for a military campaign. The king, at this time in northern England, where his support was stronger, prepared to move south towards London. In October, the king's forces met the Parliamentarian army at the Battle of Edge Hill in Warwickshire. The English Civil Wars had begun. The English Civil War was caused by a variety of factors, but can be boiled down to a disagreement between the king and Parliament on whether or not there should be limits to royal authority. Charles, a strong believer in the idea that the king was only answerable to God, sought to direct affairs of both the church and state throughout Great Britain. Rising groups such as the middle class and the Puritans, gaining power throughout Britain, sought to curtail the power of the king with that of Parliament in the form of a constitutional monarchy. Over the next 6 years, England would fight a bloody civil war over the power of the monarchy. It would end with Charles' execution in January of 1649.